You're watching JCT TV. This is Bible study for the 21st century. So friends, we're back. Jim Cantelon here, and always nice to be with you. It really is. We are in Mark chapter 13, and this is a really key chapter because Jesus, however briefly, talks about some of the signs of the end times and the destruction of the temple. It's grist for the mill for some who are really keen on eschatological end-time prophetic work. I don't want to take it that direction, but it really is fascinating. We'll get there right after this.
Wow! Working for Orphans and Widows has been caring for orphans and widows in Africa and India for over 20 years. Key to its vision is partnership with local champions who engage hundreds of church-based volunteers in home-based care. Care for the sick and the dying in their own humble homes. They are defenseless and afflicted. They are the least of these that Jesus would have us love and care for. Our partnered champions are based in South Africa, Zambia, Malawi, and India. They provide faithful, accountable, and godly care for thousands. Together with WOW, they truly are the hands and feet of Jesus to the sick and the dying. Founder and president Jim Cantelon has been committed to both teaching the gospel via Jim Cantelon Today TV and practicing the gospel through WOW. WOW is a proven ministry. We are grateful for your support. Call, write, or log on to wowmission.com and be inspired.
Now, last program, friends, I read the entire chapter. Well, yeah, I did. The entire chapter of Mark chapter 13. It's a lengthy read. I'm not going to do it again. But it all is predicated on a question that Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked Jesus privately when they say in verse 4, "Tell us, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to be fulfilled?" And Jesus says to them, "Watch out that no one deceives you." Let me just stress that again. Watch out that no one deceives you. The fact of the matter is that there's all kinds of deception out there with regard to interpretation of the end of times. Having pastored in Jerusalem for 7 years and pastoring we planted and it became the largest church in the country, still is, I had more than enough end-time prophets and preachers and evangelists come through town, all wanting my pulpit, all wanting my endorsement, which I refused for a very simple reason. They all knew for sure when Jesus was coming back, and I would remind them that Jesus himself said, "I don't know, so how do you know?" Jesus said, "Only the Father knows." And of course, they would stutter and stammer and step back a bit and come up with some kind of, "Oh, but the Lord has given me a revelation." Well, so you say. Talk to the hand. Just not accepting it. Sounds harsh, but I had to be that way because there were so many people deceiving, their congregants, deceiving their mailing list, deceiving their followers. Jesus says, watch out that no one deceives you. Okay? So, having said that, we can carry on. Many are going to come in my name. Many are going to claim to be Messiah. Don't listen to them. Jesus himself did not assume the status of oracle. Rather, he spoke with the authority of heaven. For sure, he watered it down for human consumption. He would have to. I mean, we're space-time creatures. We're so limited in our ability to understand and comprehend things. So obviously, this is watered down. But he says, be on your guard. Don't let anyone deceive you. Discernment, not gullibility, is the watchword. Yes, things will heat up. Wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines. But these will not be the end. Rather, they will be the beginning. Now, I'm just referring to the scripture, this chapter I read to you last time. The pivot point, and this is the pivot point, will be the gospel first preached to all the nations. Verse 10. Now, last time I just, what's the word I should use here? I gave you a heads up, if you will, that much of what Jesus says here in the 13th chapter of Mark was fulfilled 70 AD, when Titus and his Roman hordes came in and totally decimated Jerusalem. Jerusalem, which had already kind of self-immolated already because of the conflict between various zealot groups who were within the walls while the Romans were outside the walls. It was a horrible, horrible time of rape and pillage and murder. And as Jesus suggests, a horrible time for pregnant women and little children. So there's that aspect to it. But there's also a future aspect to it. And it's difficult for us sometimes to look at the situation as it was unfolding then, as related to Jesus' words, and the situation as it's unfolding in our own time. And we have to understand that there's a kind of a duality here that just simply has to be acknowledged, and it just creates more of a challenge for us to be thoughtful in terms of our understanding of the times in which we live. So, the gospel preached to all the nations. That has not happened yet. It can happen. It may be happening as we speak, because our world has never been so reachable through the internet, through multimedia of every description, through social media. However, it's important to remember this. Working in Africa as I do, and have been doing now for the last 25 years, I've been in many areas where there is no internet, where there's no cell phone coverage, where there is no awareness really of what's going on in the world out there, simply because they're so isolated. When Kathy and I walk into some of these villages, the kids are often horrified, the little kids, because they've never seen people with white skin before. And my wife is totally blonde, which makes it even more scary as far as they're concerned. On the other hand, they're intrigued, and usually before the day is done, Kathy will be walking along the paths with 5 little kids on one hand and 5 little kids holding on to various fingers on her hand. But the point being that they just have no idea, okay? So there's many parts of the world that have yet been touched with the gospel. There are unreached people groups, and there are whole missions organizations out there that specialize in getting to unreached people groups. It's a huge task, but it is happening. The gospel preached to the whole world. Verse 10. That is the pivot point, and that's where we have to, understand that there was a then aspect to Jesus' words, especially as related to the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And there's a future aspect to Jesus' words that relates to our time. Now, I've often been asked by people, the Apostle Paul expected Jesus to come back in his lifetime. He didn't. Every generation of Christians from then till now has expected Jesus to come back in their lifetime, and he hasn't. So what's up with this? I remind them. Peter says, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day in God's economy, okay? So if that's the case, we're living day 3 right now. We've entered the 3rd 1,000-year period, the 3rd millennium. And I fully expect that Jesus is going to come back in this millennium. Now, whether it's at the beginning of the millennium or the end or the middle, I have no idea. But when I look at our world out there right now, as Jesus described it in terms of wars and rumors of wars, earthquakes and famines, and we're looking at wildfires, and we're looking at climate change, we're looking at flooding like we've never seen flooding in our lives before. We're looking at weather systems that are all askew. one wonders, are these more of the birth pangs, if you will, of the soon coming Messiah? I'm not going to say dogmatically they are, but they certainly look like they are. And it smells like they are, It's brought a whole new urgency to my own expectation of the end and my own sense of what's up next, And I can do so with excitement because we know that the Lord is sovereign and that he is in full control of what is occurring right now. So there you go. He calls his disciples, Jesus does, to be on guard, alert, to watch. There will be an end one day, he's saying. One should live with a sense of historical and eschatological perspective at all times. The end will come suddenly. Everyone, including the self-styled prophecy experts, will be surprised. Keep your heads up. Keep the gospel first and foremost in your thinking and in your doing. Now, his warning comprises 12 elements. 1, false messiahs. 2, war. 3, national and international tensions. 4, earthquakes and famines. 5, persecution of Christian leaders. 6, the gospel to all nations. And he says the generation that sees that will also see the end. Don't be confused with verse 30. He's referring to the generation that sees the whole world reach with the gospel, okay? 7, the desolation, sacrilege. This was something that did happen back in that time, where one Seleucid leader out of Syria put up a horrible image in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, and was having people worship this idol. That's one indicator of much else that might happen. 8, widespread tribulation. 9, false hopes. There he is, he's here, Messiah's here. No. 10, celestial convulsions. Well, that's interesting. We live in the Milky Way galaxy, which the astronomers tell us is a mere midget compared to other galaxies out there. We're spinning around the edge of this galaxy, this little bit of dust called Earth. But there's going to be celestial convulsions. And then there's going to be the parousia, which means the second coming of Christ. And finally, the ingathering of the elect, as Jesus calls it. The elect being those who, the Bible says God knows them that are his. These are the people will be ingathered, okay? So he then tells the 4 disciples that only the Father knows when these things will take place. So there's no use speculating. Better to keep watch and keep your mouth shut. That's certainly my stance. Expecting, anticipating the return of Christ, but refusing to declare that I know the day and the hour. I'll be back right after this. So friends, you know that my wife and I founded this ministry called WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, 25 years ago. We were pastoring a very successful, large church on the west coast of North America. And in the context of that, the Lord really laid a number on me in terms of the impact that HIV and AIDS was having on orphans and widows around the world, with the critical mass being in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal, which is one of the provinces there, where I had connections. Because of our time in Jerusalem, we had people coming through all of the time, and often we had church groups coming from South Africa. And on one occasion, one of the pastors came up to me after a service and asked me if I would be open to coming to do some conferences for the Assemblies of God, South African Assemblies of God. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, as it turned out, we went down several times over the course of the next few years, and I did major conferences, conventions, sometimes with as many as 7,000, with white-colored, black, everything in between. And then some with just colored churches, some with just black churches, some with white churches. And it was during the time before apartheid ended. And so I was exposed to some of those realities. But I was also exposed to a number of the emerging leaders who were just young guys. And they were quite fascinated with our experience. Some of my black brothers used to refer to me as the bishop from Jerusalem. I would tell them, look, I'm not, I'm just the grunt. I just do what the Lord calls me to do. I'm no bishop. But they have a high respect for anyone out of Israel, especially out of Jerusalem. Anyway, years later, while pastoring this large church in Western Canada, I was invited to do a weekend of teaching for the leaders of a church that had been established in Durban, South Africa, right out of Jerusalem. It was considered to be a satellite congregation of King of Kings. And so I went and had a good time there. But while there, Kathy and I were watching the news, and at that time, this is the early, the late 90s, late 1990s, HIV and AIDS was decimating young adults, basically, of sub-Saharan Africa. And we watched one newscast that said that 2/3 of the citizens of KwaZulu-Natal, which is that province just outside of Durban, were infected with HIV and AIDS. And HIV and AIDS at that time was always fatal, always. And I just realized, we got to do something about this. God is a father of the fatherless, a defender of widows. We had all these widows being created, all these orphans being created. And at that time, the church was very much dead set against helping them because of the stigma and discrimination that was attached to HIV and AIDS. I had pastors tell me it's God's judgment on sexual sin. I mean, I heard the whole deal. Anyway, the upshot of it is, Kathy and I, we resigned our church, and for 8 months we lived out of suitcases, and we eventually found ourselves involved in, I would call them pastors' conferences with these guys that I knew already. And it was able to build. We started small. I remember we had 150 for our first pastors' conference. Eventually we had as many as 6,000 attending. But the point is, these were pastors of people who were dying of HIV and AIDS. And in many cases, if not all cases, they were ignoring them. And so I had a pretty harsh message. And sometimes I got a lot of pushback, but I kept at it. Well, the upshot of it is, friends, over 25 years of faithfulness, just keeping at it, we've had a huge exposure to the suffering, orphan and widow, in sub-Saharan Africa, and now also in India. And Kathy and I are about to go over in a few weeks for another one of these times in sub-Saharan Africa. But when we're there, we're taken into far-flung villages where people live very basic lives, and where, by God's grace and by champions we've identified, and we are now supporting pastors who, with their local church volunteers, are doing home-based care, caring for those who are dying, caring for those who are sick, caring for those who are diseased. It's an amazing thing that's happening. And so here's a few pics from the last time we were there. These pics are from Malawi, actually. And most of our audience are women. Everyone you see in these pics is a widow. And they're poor. They're colorful. They're full of love for God and for each other, but they're widows. And in many cases have been HIV positive and still are HIV positive. But because of antiretroviral medication, their viral load is not detectable. It's there, but it's not detectable. And they're living pretty good lives. And we've been teaching them about nutrition in combination with antiretroviral medication. And they're looking very healthy. Some of these women look like skeletons when we met them a few years ago. But they're just salt of the earth people. They have such a love for each other. And, you know, they have nothing. They're like the widow that Jesus talked about, putting her 2 copper pennies into the kettle, you know, at the temple in Jerusalem. Now, sometimes when we're meeting, we'll have presentations. This was from a woman, and you notice she's wearing a blue t-shirt. Anyone in a blue t-shirt here is one of our volunteers. Every one of these volunteers in their blue t-shirts is HIV positive. Every one of them was dying a few years ago when they were young women, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. And by God's grace and antiretrovirals and good nutrition and other means of building up their immune system, they not only are thriving, but they now are ministering to those who are dying. And so these are some of the volunteers who work with local church pastors, caring for those who are afflicted. Now, it seems kind of humble, but this is what they do. They just sit on the ground. And you'll see a few men there too, by the way. They want to hear the word of the Lord. And so Kathy and I will arrive with one of our champions. In this case, it's Teresa Malila, who's sitting to my left there. And this group of widows, I should say HIV widows, are making a presentation, singing and dancing and loving Jesus. And we sit there, and it'll take about an hour for all of these preliminaries. And then they want me to speak to them, which I do, but it's got to be at least an hour. If I speak for less than an hour, they figure I'm cheating them. But, you know, they're such thoughtful souls. Now, let me just show you a video here. If I get started. There we go. The gal in the middle, her name is Chipo. She's the lead singer and the lead dancer. She looks pretty robust, doesn't she? I knew her when she could hardly lift her head off a pillow. She was dying of HIV and was thin. They're spreading water there, by the way, just to cut down on the dust. And now she's a key volunteer for our ministry there. Always a lot of children, always a lot of kids. I mean, it's just awesome. It's just seeing the kids. Pardon me, I'll just go. And here's another video I want to show you. This gal in the front is Teresa Malila. She is a champion. She and I met when we were starting WOW, and she was just starting her ministry, which is called Somebody Cares. She started with a Bible and a little bit of oil, and she would walk from village to village and anoint people who were sick and pray for them and teach the scriptures. Kathy and I walked with her on some of those occasions. Today, she's overseeing this massive ministry in Malawi. In fact, she's seen as a national treasure because these wonderful women that she's leading have been made new through the power of Christ. It's a privilege. It's an honor. It's humbling to be involved in this. And just like when we planted Kingdom Kings in Jerusalem, and I didn't know what in the world I was doing, except I was just trying to follow the Lord's lead. You know, people say, well, you must have had a plan. I didn't have any plan. Well, it must be great, you know, when the plan comes. No, the plan didn't come together because I had nothing to do with the plan. Well, you must have bathed this thing in prayer. Well, no, I didn't. How do you pray and say, Lord, please lead me to plant a church in Jerusalem at the invitation of the Israeli government? That's not going to happen, but that's what happened. I'm just like a little kid holding onto his father's hand, walking in his shadow. He opens the doors. I'm dumb enough to go through, but I trust him. And so in Israel and now in Africa, by God's grace, terrific things are happening. And I'm so grateful that I can be a part of it. You know, most of my colleagues, my peer group, pastors, are all retired. I think I'm the last man standing in terms of my age group in the ministry in my circle who's not retired. But when they ask me if I'm going to retire, I say, why would I do that? I've got the biggest horizon in my life, with WOW, with JCT, with the books I'm writing. You can check my books at Jim Cantelon today. Go to my website, you'll find them. But it's just a huge horizon. And the thing is, God is in it. And when you're walking with the Lord, it's an ageless exercise. I want to thank those of you who are supporting us. You're really making a difference. And by God's grace, on your behalf, we'll continue to make a difference. I'll be back right after this.
WOW! Working for Orphans and Widows is a trusted Christian charity reaching out to the sick and the dying, the least of these in pandemic-stricken Africa and India. For over 22 years, Jim and Kathy Cantelon have engaged with community-based champions and church volunteers in the care for those whom Jim calls society's weakest link. Everything from home-based palliative care to the rescue and protection of young women and girls who are victims of abuse is done in the name of Jesus and is overseen by local partner champions and an army of church-based volunteers. WOW has a proven track record. Check it out on wowmission.com, or if you wish, you can call or write to us. Its sustainability is dependent on the support of faithful friends like you.
If you want to find out more about JCT and WOW, it's very easy. All you do is go to your phone or to your computer and log in wowmission.com, wowmission.com, or Instagram at wowmission, or Jim Cantelon Today, or Roku, Jim Cantelon Today, or Jim Cantelon Today YouTube. Gee. I mean, it's amazing these days. You can be everywhere at the same time. But you can get informed. And if you have a sense the Lord would like you to get involved supporting this ministry, there are ways to support it. And those websites will show you how. You press these little buttons, Anyway, it's amazing, this world we're living in. I really appreciate your partnering with us. So, until the next time, I'm Jim Cantelon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.